street boy had just saved Michael Jordan's life. "Michael Jordan, don't eat that! She wants to kill you!" The scream reverberates through Chicago's most exclusive restaurant. 12-year-old Deshaun Williams, barefoot and desperate, burst between the tables. His tattered clothes starkly contrast with the opulent surroundings. Michael Jordan freezes. The spoon hovers mere inches from his lips. The steaming soup reflects his stunned face. "Poison!" Deshaun points to a blonde woman nearby. "I saw her put white powder in it when no one was looking." A deathly silence. Victoria Sterling pales. The perfect smile she had maintained moments earlier crumbles like a house of cards. Jordan slowly lowers the spoon, his eyes blazing with adrenaline. The street boy may have thwarted the assassination of the century. But who is this elegant woman, and why does she want the basketball legend dead? 3 hours earlier, the day had begun like any other in Michael Jordan's life. The autumn sun gilded the streets of Chicago as he strolled along the magnificent mile, shielded only by sunglasses and a discreet baseball cap. At 63, Jordan still exuded the magnetic presence that had made him a legend. Every step bespoke the confidence of a man who had conquered 6 NBA championships and transformed into a billionaire. But that day, something different lingered in the air. "Mr. Jordan, your table is ready," announced the maître d' of Le Bernardin, Chicago, the city's most exclusive French restaurant. Jordan nodded discreetly. He had chosen that particular venue precisely for its promised discretion. He needed a moment of peace to contemplate his upcoming investments, far from the flashes and autograph requests that had pursued him since the 1980s. The establishment teamed with Chicago's elite. Executives discussed business in hushed tones. Socialites flaunted jewels that cost more than entire homes. The aroma of truffles and French champagne permeated the sophisticated air. Even attempting to remain unnoticed, Michael Jordan could not conceal his aura. Whispers began to ripple through the tables, like waves on a placid lake. "It's really him. Michael Jordan, ... My God, it truly is him. Should I ask for an autograph?" The waiters moved with even greater elegance, cognizant they were serving sports royalty. The sommelier personally selected the most expensive bottle of wine in the house. Even the restaurant's discreet security personnel positioned themselves strategically. Jordan ensconced himself at the reserved table, by the window offering an unobstructed view of Rush Street. He removed his sunglasses, revealing the eyes that had intimidated adversaries on courts worldwide. "Good afternoon, Mr. Jordan. It's an honor to have you with us," murmured the head waiter, a man in his 50s who maintained his professional composure despite his undisguised admiration. "Thank you. I just want a quiet lunch," Jordan replied with the smile that was worth billions in endorsement contracts. Outside on the frosty pavement, Deshaun Williams pressed his face against the restaurant's glass. His eyes gleamed with pure recognition and admiration. Deshaun Williams had spent the past 6 months on the streets of Chicago after fleeing his 5th abusive foster home. At 12 years old, he had learned that survival meant observing, memorizing patterns, and trusting only himself. On that cold October afternoon, he was rummaging through dumpsters for food scraps when he spotted the unmistakable figure through Le Bernardin's storefront window. Even with a cap and sunglasses, there was no mistaking him. Michael Jordan, his ultimate hero, was there, just a few feet away. "It's him. It's really him," Deshaun whispered, pressing his chilled hands against the glass. For years, Jordan had been his sole source of hope. In orphanages, he would obsessively watch 90s Bulls highlights. In abusive homes, he dreamed of meeting the man who had proven that boys like him could conquer the world. Now, for the first time, Jordan was real, tangible, breathing the same Chicago air as him. Deshaun decided to stay, not to ask for money or an autograph, but simply to observe his idol exist in the real world. He huddled against the wall of the neighboring building, sheltering himself from the biting wind, but keeping his gaze riveted on the restaurant window. He had no idea this decision would save the life of his greatest inspiration. Victoria Sterling had observed Michael Jordan enter the restaurant with an interest that far surpassed common admiration. At 45, the millionaire investor cultivated an elegance that concealed decades of fierce ambition and, more recently, a burgeoning bitterness. Dressed in a black Chanel suit that had cost more than a luxury car, Victoria exuded the kind of sophistication that opened doors in the most exclusive circles. Platinum blonde hair pulled back into an impeccable bun, professionally applied makeup, nails manicured at the most expensive salon on Michigan Avenue. But behind the impeccable facade, a lethal rage had been seething for months. Perfect, she murmured to herself, adjusting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. Victoria Sterling's presence was no accident. For weeks, she had been meticulously orchestrating this casual encounter with Jordan. She had suborned employees to ascertain the restaurants frequented by the former athlete. She had studied his habits, his culinary preferences, even the specific varietal of wine he favored, all for this very moment. She rose gracefully from her table, smoothed her skirt, and glided towards Jordan's with the assuredness of one who had always effortlessly attained her desires. Her smile was perfect, calculated, lethal. "Mr. Jordan?" Victoria approached the table with a smile that seemed plucked from a fashion magazine. "Forgive the interruption, but I simply couldn't pass up the opportunity to meet my inspiration." Jordan looked up, reflexively polite. Decades of fame had conditioned him for such encounters. "Of course, no problem," he replied, gesturing to the vacant chair opposite him. "Please have a seat." "Victoria Sterling," she extended a gloved hand. "I'm an investor here in Chicago. Your business acumen has always been an inspiration to me. The way you've transformed your brand into an empire, simply brilliant." The compliment rang true. Jordan eased slightly. Victoria exuded the kind of intellect and sophistication he respected in the business world. "Thank you. It's always refreshing to encounter someone who understands that sport is merely the beginning." Jordan signaled the waiter for another glass of wine. "Exactly." Victoria leaned in slightly. "Incidentally, have you tried the house's special soup? It's an exclusive French recipe featuring imported truffles. The chef informed me it's the most sophisticated dish on the menu." Her eyes sparkled with an intensity that could be mistaken for genuine gastronomic enthusiasm. "Special soup?" Jordan quickly scanned the menu. "I hadn't noticed it. Do you highly recommend it?" "Absolutely," Victoria nodded with studied conviction. "It's a singular experience. The chef seamlessly combines classic French techniques with exceedingly rare ingredients. It costs $300 a bowl, but it's worth every single cent." The price, while trivial to a billionaire, subtly underscored its exclusivity. Jordan had always appreciated unique culinary experiences. "Waiter," he beckoned, signaling, "I'd like to try that special soup the lady mentioned." "An excellent choice, Mr. Jordan," the waiter noted on his gilded pad. "We'll serve it in approximately 20 minutes. It's prepared individually." Victoria smiled, but something dark flickered rapidly in her eyes before vanishing. "I'm sure you'll adore it," she murmured, taking a long sip of wine. "It's an unforgettable experience." The timbre of her voice carried layers of meaning that Jordan couldn't quite decipher. Outside, Deshawn continued to observe through the window, unaware that he was witnessing the preparations for a crime. Deshawn Williams possessed a gift honed by years of street survival: reading people. Abandoned children quickly learned to discern danger, falsehoods, and malevolent intentions. It was a matter of life or death. Something about the blonde woman deeply unnerved him. As he watched through the window, he noticed details that would elude most. The way she clutched the glass, too rigid, excessively controlled. The smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her posture, which hinted at tension despite her apparent relaxation. "She's off," he murmured to himself, shifting to a better vantage point. Deshawn had seen predators before. Adults who preyed on street children with false promises. People who smiled while plotting harm. The elegant woman exuded the same perilous energy, merely masked beneath expensive attire and refined manners. His instincts screamed alarm. Michael Jordan chatted animatedly, clearly captivated by the sophisticated company. But Deshawn perceived what the celebrity couldn't: Victoria's micro-expressions when she thought no one was watching. The way her hands subtly clenched into fists. The predatory gleam in her eyes. Something dreadful was poised to occur. Deshawn felt it in his gut. 20 minutes later, the waiter emerged from the kitchen bearing a golden bowl on a silver tray. Michael Jordan's special soup was ready. Deshaun pressed his face even tighter against the glass, scrutinizing every movement. The waiter carefully placed the dish before Jordan, who politely inhaled the aroma. But it was at that precise moment that Deshaun witnessed something that chilled him to the bone. As Jordan and the waiter discussed the soup's ingredients, Victoria Sterling made a swift, surreptitious movement. Her right hand slid into her Hermes bag on her lap. She extracted something minuscule, a small paper sachet that Deshaun could barely discern. With a practiced movement, she poured a crystalline white powder into Jordan's soup. The powder dissolved instantly into the golden liquid, vanishing without a visible trace. Victoria tucked the empty envelope into her purse in an instant. Her face retained the same amiable expression as before, as if nothing had happened. "My God," Deshaun whispered, his heart hammering. She had put something into Michael Jordan's food, something that dissolved too quickly to be ordinary seasoning, something concealed in a secret envelope. Poison. Deshaun Williams broke into a run. His worn sneakers slapped against the cold concrete as he sprinted toward the restaurant's entrance. The uniformed doorman was preoccupied, engrossed in conversation with a limousine driver. The boy shot past him like a blur. "Hey, kid, stop right there," shouted the doorman. But Deshaun had already streaked through the opulent lobby. The doors to the main dining room flung open. Deshaun burst into the sophisticated ambiance like a whirlwind of unadulterated urgency. Michael Jordan's spoon was mere inches from his mouth. No time remained for doubt or hesitation. Deshaun Williams transformed into a missile of sheer determination, hurtling across Le Bernardin's dining room. Dining tables, each worth more than he saw in an entire year, became mere obstacles to be surmounted. "Stop that boy," shouted the maitre d', gesticulating frantically at the security guards. Two men in black suits converged from the flanks, attempting to intercept the boy who was running as if his life depended on it. Deshaun dodged the first with a feint worthy of the finest basketball players. The second nearly caught him, but the boy slid beneath a table occupied by an elderly couple. Expensive dishes went flying. Crystal goblets shattered on the marble floor. The cries of surprise and indignation from the patrons created a cacophony of chaos in the previously serene ambiance. "Seize that urchin," vociferated a socialite, clutching her pearls as if the boy intended to pilfer them. But Deshaun had a singular objective: Michael Jordan, his golden soup, and the blonde woman who smiled as she observed the chaos she had indirectly wrought. Victoria Sterling observed the commotion with thinly veiled fascination. In a matter of seconds, her perfect vengeance would be thwarted by a mere street urchin. The irony was almost poetic. "Michael Jordan, don't eat that! She's trying to kill you!" Deshaun's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. All motion ceased instantaneously. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael Jordan froze, his gilded spoon suspended mid-air, the specialty soup dripping back into the bowl. His gaze locked with the boy's for the first time, and the sheer desperation in the child's plea caused him to falter. "She poisoned your soup!" Deshaun pointed directly at Victoria Sterling, whose complexion visibly blanched. The entire restaurant became a tableau vivant, frozen in time. Waiters stood motionless, trays suspended mid-air. Diners' forks remained poised, frozen between plate and mouth. Even the ambient music seemed to recede into a murmur. Victoria Sterling forced a laugh that rang hollow. "What utter nonsense!" she exclaimed, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor. "This child is clearly mentally disturbed." Jordan remained unmoving, his gaze dissecting the two. Decades spent competing at the highest echelons had honed his instincts for discerning veracity from deceit under duress. There was something in the boy's eyes, an unshakable conviction that defied his tender years. And something in Victoria's denial. It was too defensive, too swift. "Security, remove this child immediately," Victoria commanded, gesturing imperiously. But Jordan raised a hand, halting the approaching men in their tailored suits. Le Bernardin's dining room had transmuted into a surreal theatrical stage. Patrons rose from their tables, some filming with mobile phones, others murmuring conspiratorial theories. The waitstaff were at a loss, unsure whether to resume service or summon the authorities. "Mr. Jordan," the maitre d' interjected, beads of sweat glistening on his brow. Should we summon the authorities to quell this disruption? Michael Jordan's gaze flickered between Deshaun Williams and Victoria Sterling. The boy was breathing heavily after his desperate dash, yet his stance remained resolute. Victoria maintained a forced, elegant smile, but her hands quivered almost imperceptibly. "Hold," Jordan murmured, carefully setting down his spoon. Deshaun seized upon the hesitation. "Mr. Jordan, please, hear me out," he implored, disregarding the approaching security detail. "I witnessed the entire thing. She retrieved an envelope from her handbag and emptied a white powder into your soup when your back was turned." "This is preposterous!" Victoria Sterling rose abruptly, upturning her glass of red wine. The liquid spread across the pristine white tablecloth like a crimson stain. "I am Victoria Sterling, a highly esteemed investor in this city. I will not countenance such baseless accusations from a disturbed street urchin." Jordan, however, noted how she averted his direct gaze, how her hands clenched into fists, how a flush crept up her neck despite the professional makeup. Michael Jordan and Deshaun Williams locked gazes across the restaurant's chaotic expanse. Two utterly disparate worlds, one a billionaire at the zenith of success, the other an abandoned boy struggling for survival, bound by a moment of unadulterated truth. Jordan saw something in the boy's eyes he recognized, the fierce determination of one who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. The same intensity he himself had carried during his impoverished childhood in Wilmington, North Carolina. "What's your name, son?" Jordan asked calmly. "Deshaun Williams, sir," the boy replied, straightening his shoulders despite the circumstances. "And I'm not crazy. I saw her put something in your food, something that dissolved too rapidly to be normal." The sincerity in Deshaun's voice was impossible to feign. Jordan had interviewed thousands of people over the years, from teammates to corporate executives. He knew how to discern truth from falsehood. "Why would you do that?" Jordan asked, though his eyes were already shifting towards Victoria Sterling. "Why would you risk everything to warn me?" Deshaun swallowed hard. The question struck at the core of his being. "Because you proved that boys like me can amount to something," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You're living proof that it doesn't matter where we come from. And I couldn't stand by and watch someone try to extinguish that from the world." The silence in the restaurant was deafening, as if time itself had paused to bear witness to what was about to transpire. Michael Jordan remained motionless for 3 seconds that stretched into an eternity. 3 seconds where the destiny of two lives hung in an invisible balance. 3 seconds where the echo of Deshaun's desperate cry still reverberated through the marble walls. Then something shifted in his eyes. The basketball legend rose with the same unwavering resolve he exhibited in clutch moments during the playoffs. Every movement calculated, every taut muscle bearing the weight of decades of improbable victories. At 63, Michael Jordan still possessed that magnetic presence that made adversaries recoil before the game even began. The entire room held its breath. "No one lays a hand on this boy." His voice cut through the air like a blade. It was not a request. It was an unequivocal pronouncement, delivered by the man who had never countenanced defeat as an option. The two security guards advancing toward Deshaun froze mid-stride. Their honed musculature, their restraint techniques, all their professional experience, none of it mattered in the face of the awe-inspiring presence Jordan radiated. It was like attempting to confront a hurricane barehanded. Deshaun felt tears sting his eyes. For the first time in months of eking out an existence on the streets, someone was on his side. Someone believed in him. And it wasn't just anyone, it was his hero, the man whose footsteps he had dreamed of following ever since he had stumbled upon basketball on a derelict court. "Mr. Jordan," the maitre d' approached tentatively, beads of perspiration forming on his brow. His voice quavered slightly. "This establishment has a century-old reputation to uphold. We cannot permit disruptions." "Disruption?" Jordan pivoted slowly toward the maitre d'. His eyes gleamed with that same intensity that caused adversaries to make fatal missteps. The man who was accustomed to dealing with millionaires and celebrities felt the words die in his throat. "The only disruption here would be me walking out the front door and broadcasting to the world how children are treated in this place." The gravity of that threat reverberated through the dining hall. Clients whispered nervously. Waiters exchanged uneasy glances. The restaurant's reputation would not withstand a public denunciation from Michael Jordan. Victoria Sterling observed the scene with mounting horror. Her fingers quivered imperceptibly as she held her wineglass. Years of planning, millions expended on investigations, months meticulously orchestrating every detail of her perfect retribution, all unraveling because of a barefoot boy who had no business being there. "Michael, please," she attempted to reclaim her intimate and seductive tone from before, but her voice emerged sharper than intended. "You've known me for less than an hour, but you can already discern who I am, a respected businesswoman, an investor in numerous social causes. Do you truly prefer to believe the fantasies of a clearly traumatized street urchin?" She paused, allowing the venom of her words to permeate the air. "Look at him, Michael. Grimy attire, unaccompanied, living on the streets for God knows how long. How many substances has that boy ingested? How many delusions has he entertained?" Deshawn felt every word as a visceral blow. That was precisely what people thought when they saw him. A problematic, troubled, invisible boy. For one dreadful moment, he wondered if Jordan, too, would begin to doubt. But then something extraordinary happened. Michael Jordan took 2 steps toward Deshawn, not to retreat, but to draw closer. He placed his large, protective hand on the boy's slender shoulder, a gesture that spoke volumes. "Do you know what I see when I look at this boy?" Jordan spoke, his gaze fixed on Victoria, his voice laden with suppressed emotion. "I see courage. I see someone who risked everything to do what was right." The entire restaurant remained in absolute silence. Even the waiters had ceased moving. "This boy doesn't know me personally. He has nothing to gain by saving me. Yet he intruded upon this establishment knowing he would be ejected, humiliated, perhaps even arrested. Why? To protect a stranger?" Jordan paused, allowing his words to resonate. How many adults in this room would do the same? Victoria felt her blood run cold. The narrative was utterly slipping from her grasp. Every word from Jordan transformed Deshawn from a problem into a hero, from a disturber into a savior. "And do you know what else?" Jordan continued, his voice gaining momentum. "My instincts brought me here. The very same instincts that made me a 6-time champion. And those instincts are screaming that this boy's telling the truth." Deshawn felt his chest swell. For the first time in his life, someone saw in him what he himself aspired to be. Not an abandoned boy, but a protector. Not a problem, but a solution. Furthermore, Jordan turned directly to Victoria, his eyes piercing her facade of sophistication. "The more you speak, the more intriguing your insistence that I not believe him becomes." Genuine terror flickered in Victoria's eyes for a split second. Jordan had noticed. Of course he had. The man who read opponents like open books would not overlook her body language. "I want this soup analyzed," Jordan announced to the maitre d', his voice resonating with ultimate authority. "Now, and I want the police summoned so we can all clarify this situation once and for all." The maitre d' gestured frantically to the waiters. Victoria Sterling realized that her meticulously orchestrated revenge was about to devolve into her own undoing. And Deshawn Williams, the invisible boy from the streets of Chicago, finally had someone who believed in his voice. A surge of relief washed over Deshawn Williams as he realized Michael Jordan was taking his words seriously. Yet he knew he needed to furnish more details to entirely persuade his idol. "Mr. Jordan," he began, taking a deep breath to collect his thoughts, "I witnessed precisely what she did. This woman right here," he gestured pointedly towards Victoria, "had a small envelope in her handbag. While you were conversing with the waiter about the ingredients, she took out that envelope and poured a white powder into your soup." Victoria Sterling forced another laugh, but the sound emerged shrill and artificial. "This is pure fantasy," she exclaimed, gesticulating dramatically. "A traumatized child fabricating tales for attention." "The powder dissolved instantly," Deshawn pressed on, disregarding her protests. "It was crystalline, incredibly fine, and she tucked the empty envelope back into her handbag. It's in there right now." Jordan's gaze honed in on Victoria's Hermes handbag. She instinctively clutched the bag closer to her body, a defensive gesture that did not escape his notice. "If you have nothing to conceal," Jordan stated placidly, "you wouldn't object to revealing the bag's contents, would you?" Victoria's complexion paled further. For the first time since her appearance, her veneer of sophistication began to visibly fracture. "This is an absolute outrage," she protested, her voice emerging sharper than usual. I am not obligated to subject myself to this humiliation. Victoria Sterling attempted to regain control of the situation, drawing upon her vast experience in high-stakes boardrooms. Decades spent maneuvering executives and investors had honed her powers of persuasion. Michael, please, she said, forcing tears to her eyes. I am a woman of repute being accused by a visibly disturbed child. You know my standing in Chicago's business community. Would I jeopardize all that for what reason? What possible motive would I have to harm you? It was a logical argument. Indeed, Victoria Sterling was a recognized figure in business circles. Her impeccable presentation and polished comportment lent credence to her credibility. Perhaps this boy is confused, she continued, modulating her voice to a tone of maternal compassion and understanding. Street children frequently suffer traumas that distort their grasp of reality. He needs psychological help, not for us to indulge his delusions. Some clients began to mutter their assent. Victoria's explanation sounded more reasonable than an abandoned child's accusations. But Deshaun Williams remained undeterred. I'm not crazy, he shouted, his voice resonating throughout the hall. I know what I saw. And if she's so innocent, why won't she let Mr. Jordan inspect her handbag? Victoria Sterling clutched her handbag tighter against her chest. Beads of perspiration began to surface on her forehead, marring her flawless makeup. Deshaun realized he needed to be more specific to sway the adults. Street children learned to observe details others ignored. It was a matter of survival. The envelope was small, the kind used for medication, he described with surgical precision. It had something written on it, but I couldn't read it from afar. The powder was crystalline, like fine salt, but it shimmered with an unusual luminescence. And when she poured it in, the soup briefly shifted color for a second before returning to normal. The detailed description even took the skeptics aback. It was impossible for a child to fabricate so many specific details. Furthermore, Deshaun continued, his confidence swelling, she checked her watch 3 times after putting in the powder, as if she was timing something. And when she finished, she smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was a look of profound satisfaction, like someone who had just completed a meticulous task. Michael Jordan observed Victoria Sterling intently as Deshaun spoke. Every detail mentioned by the boy corresponded to micro-expressions he now consciously recalled having subconsciously registered. Victoria, Jordan said levelly, you've checked your watch repeatedly in the last few minutes. The woman instinctively glanced at the gold Rolex on her wrist, unwittingly validating the remark. I was checking an appointment, she faltered. Her hesitancy, however, was palpable to all. Victoria Sterling felt the walls unequivocally closing in around her. Months of meticulous planning were unraveling because of a street urchin who had chosen the wrong moment to play the hero. This is ridiculous. She tried one last time, but her voice betrayed a mounting desperation. I am the victim of a childish fantasy fueled by collective paranoia. Jordan noted her trembling hands, her averted gaze, her quickened breathing. If you are innocent, he said unflappably, there's no harm in showing the bag. It will prove the boy mistaken and put an end to this embarrassing predicament for all. I'm not compelled, Victoria began. No one said you are compelled, Jordan interjected, but an innocent person typically cooperates to dispel misunderstandings. The logic was unassailable. Victoria looked around the hall, realizing that all eyes were riveted on her. Patrons whispered among themselves. Some filmed with their mobile phones. The situation was escalating into a public spectacle. Very well, she finally said, but her hands continued clutching her bag. But this is an indignity I shall not forget. Slowly, painstakingly slowly, she began to unfasten the golden clasp of her Hermes bag. Inside, plainly visible, was a small paper envelope with residue of fine white crystalline powder. Absolute silence descended. The world seemed to decelerate when Michael Jordan lowered his gaze to Victoria Sterling's bag. There, amidst the burgeoning commotion, something gleamed under the crystal chandelier lights. A small white envelope, half hidden among silk scarves and gold credit cards. But it was no ordinary envelope. It was too thick to be merely paper, too weighty to be innocuous. The air in the restaurant grew charged, electric, as if a tempest was on the verge of breaking within those Italian marble walls. Explain this. Jordan's voice emerged perilously low, every syllable laden with an authority that made the entire hall tremble. It was the same tone he used when adversaries sought to intimidate him during the playoffs. Calm, yet lethal. Victoria Sterling followed his gaze and her blood ran cold. Number it couldn't be. She had been so careful, so meticulous. How had that envelope become visible? Her fingers trembled as she quickly snapped her purse shut, but it was too late. Too late to hide, too late to pretend, too late to turn back. Dozens of eyes had seen, dozens of witnesses. And worse yet, 3 people at the next table were recording everything on their cell phones, live streaming to their social media followers. The truth now had wings of its own. This means nothing, Victoria stammered, her voice losing the silken confidence it had moments before. It could be anything, a headache medication, sugar for coffee, perhaps some candies. But even she knew how ridiculous her words sounded. Who carried sugar in secret envelopes? Who hid medication as if it were contraband? Her credibility had not just cracked, it had shattered into 1,000 pieces before everyone. Deshaun Williams watched it all with a mixture of fascination and terror. His heart hammered so loudly he was certain everyone could hear it. It had worked. Michael Jordan was safe. But something in Victoria's expression frightened him. It was the look of someone cornered, and cornered people did unpredictable things. Jordan pushed the soup bowl away from him with a deliberate final motion. The golden liquid that moments before had seemed appetizing now emanated a sinister aura, as if malevolence itself had taken liquid form. "Waiter," his voice cut through the nervous murmur of the patrons like a blade. "I want you to take this soup for laboratory analysis immediately and call the police." Now the word police echoed through the hall like thunder. "No!" Victoria's scream was so loud, so desperate, that it made several people recoil instinctively. She rose so abruptly that her chair toppled backward, striking the marble floor with a crash that reverberated through the walls. "You don't understand," her voice came out shrill, breaking into a high-pitched cry. "You don't know what he did to me, what people like him do to people like me every day." Her mask of elegance had fallen completely. It lay shattered on the floor alongside her chair. For the first time since she had entered that restaurant, the true Victoria Sterling emerged from her disguise, and she was terrifying. Her eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from sheer rage. Decades of bitterness, resentment, and a thirst for vengeance finally erupted from her like magma from a volcano. Deshaun felt a chill run down his spine. He had saved his hero's life, but something told him the worst was yet to come. Victoria Sterling was not merely a woman rejected or humiliated. She was far more perilous than that. "Do you want to know the truth?" Victoria Sterling shrieked these words as if they were a declaration of war. Her voice reverberated through the hall with the force of a bomb about to detonate, causing the crystal chandeliers to tremble slightly. The entire restaurant plunged into a silence so profound it seemed to have been sucked into a vacuum. Even the waiters froze mid-movement, trays suspended in the air like bronze statues. Victoria had crossed an invisible line, and everyone knew there would be no turning back. "I will tell you the truth," she bellowed again, her voice cracking under the weight of emotions contained for years. Tears began to stream down her face, not from sorrow, but from pure distilled rage. Each falling drop further marred her carefully applied makeup, revealing the wounded woman beneath the perfect facade. "My name is Victoria Sterling," she declared, pointing an accusatory finger directly at Michael Jordan's chest. "And this man owes me $43 million. Jordan furrowed his brow, genuinely bewildered. His mind raced through decades of investments, business ventures, contracts, and partnerships. But that name, that face, nothing was familiar to him. "I don't know you," he said with absolute honesty. "I've never done business with you in my entire life." "Of course you don't know me." Victoria's laughter was bitter, sharp as broken glass. She threw her head back and laughed until her tears mingled with the raw sound emanating from her throat. People like you never remember the lives you destroy along the way. You trample on us as if we were ants and move on to the next million, the next contract, the next opportunity to crush dreams. She paused breathless, the words tumbling out in uncontrolled bursts. 2 years ago, her voice began low, perilous. I invested everything I had in a franchise inspired by you. Air Jordan Fitness Centers. Remember that? No? Of course you don't. Jordan began to form a vague recollection. He was vaguely familiar with the name, one of hundreds of companies that licensed his brand, but he didn't personally oversee every venture bearing his name. They promised, Victoria continued, her voice gaining momentum like a gathering storm, that anything associated with the name Michael Jordan would be pure gold, that his brand was infallible, that people like you didn't fail. She took hesitant steps toward his desk, her high heels clicking on the marble like a countdown. $43 million, she shrieked, each word piercing the air. 43 million. My entire inheritance left by my father who toiled 70 years of his life building our family empire. All invested in the promise that Michael Jordan was synonymous with success. Deshaun watched in horror. He had never witnessed such concentrated hatred aimed at one person. It was like watching a human volcano erupt. And do you know what happened? Victoria laughed again, a sound utterly devoid of humor. The franchise collapsed within 8 months. 8 months. Your partners absconded with the investors' money. Your lawyers claimed you had no legal liability because it was merely brand licensing. Jordan felt the full weight of the revelation. He understood the risks of licensing ventures, but he had never truly pondered the real people who lost everything based on trust in his name. I lost everything, Victoria's voice cracked. But she quickly composed herself, her fury returning in full force. My house in Beverly Hills, my apartment in Manhattan, my cars, my jewelry, my dignity, all for believing in the legend of Michael Jordan. She moved closer, her eyes fixed on his with laser-like intensity. But do you know what the worst part was? When I tried to contact you, your team, to explain what had happened, I was treated like a lunatic, like a fanatic trying to extort money from a celebrity. Tears now streamed freely, but her voice remained strong, fueled by years of accumulated humiliation. Mr. Jordan does not get involved in licensing matters, they'd say. Contact the lawyers, they'd tell me, as if I were an annoying insect bothering a deity. Victoria stopped directly in front of the desk, her hands resting on the polished wood. So, Michael Jordan, I decided that if justice wouldn't come through the courts, it would come through me. If you wouldn't pay for what you did, at least you would pay with the only thing people like you truly value, your precious life. The ensuing silence was deafening. Every person in the restaurant processed what they had just heard, a confession of an attempt to eliminate someone, live in front of dozens of witnesses. Jordan absorbed every word. For the first time, he saw Victoria not as a psychopath, but as a woman who had lost everything and blamed him for her downfall. This did not justify her actions, but it did explain the pain behind the madness. Victoria, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, I am truly sorry for what you've endured, truly, but I cannot be held responsible for every business that uses my brand. There are contracts, attorneys, entire corporations that manage these matters. No, she shrieked, pounding her fists on the table. You can't just apologize and pretend that resolves everything. You sold dreams. You sold the promise that following in your footsteps would lead to success. And when people like me bought into those dreams and lost everything, you simply said, not my problem. Suddenly, Victoria Sterling no longer seemed like a calculating villain. She appeared to be a shattered woman who had chosen the darkest path to cope with her pain. And the worst part, her voice now a painful whisper, is that you don't even remember. To you, I'm just another faceless person who lost money in a botched deal. But to me, you are the man who destroyed my entire life. Jordan looked at her with dawning comprehension. How many other people had been harmed by ventures bearing his name? How many other Victorias were out there, feeling betrayed and abandoned? That's why I decided you needed to pay. Victoria concluded, her confession complete. If I couldn't have my life back, I would at least ensure you lost yours. It seemed Just. The word just resonated through the hall like a death knell. Deshaun Williams observed everything with a mixture of horror and fascination. He had saved his hero's life, but now he understood he had saved far more than that. He had prevented a pain from escalating into irreversible tragedy. And amidst that explosive confession, a police siren began to wail in the distance, rapidly approaching the restaurant. The truth finally was coming to light. Victoria Sterling swiped at her tears with the back of her hand, only smearing her makeup further. Her metamorphosis from an elegant socialite to a desperate woman was complete. "You have no conception of what it means to lose absolutely everything," she continued, fixing Jordan with a gaze of unadulterated hatred. "I was a respected figure. I wielded power, influence, possessed a guaranteed future, and then I reposed my entire trust in the Michael Jordan brand." The restaurant patrons remained spellbound, some surreptitiously filmed with their mobile phones. This was the sort of drama poised to generate headlines for weeks. Victoria proceeded, pacing agitatedly through the aisles between the tables. They presented charts, statistical data, and projections. They claimed any venture associated with the Jordan name was unequivocally destined for success. Jordan listened impassively, recognizing the familiar pattern. His brand boasted hundreds of licensing agreements. While not all proved successful, the contracts invariably incorporated risk clauses. "I mortgaged my residence in Lake Forest," Victoria continued. "I liquidated stocks, disposed of my jewelry, everything of tangible worth. $43 million deposited into the franchise account, all predicated on the assurance that the Michael Jordan name was synonymous with success." Her voice faltered slightly. "Within 6 months, it had all evaporated. Mismanagement, a saturated market, ferocious competition. The franchise filed for bankruptcy, and I was utterly ruined," Deshaun Williams observed, utterly captivated. He had never before witnessed an adult unravel so completely. "Do you know what I was told when I sought recourse?" Victoria Sterling pivoted to face Michael Jordan directly, her eyes inflamed with tears and fury. "All investments entail risk. Read the contracts more diligently next time." She cruelly mimicked the unctuous tone of the corporate executives. "Next time," she shrieked. "There was no next time. I had lost everything. 40 years spent meticulously building a life, a reputation, a fortune, and it all evaporated because I clung to the promise that Michael Jordan never fails." Jordan remained composed, yet a flicker in his eyes betrayed that Victoria's words were impacting him more profoundly than he let on. "You amassed your billions by peddling dreams," Victoria continued, pointing an accusatory finger. "Peddling the delusion that hard work and your brand assure success. Yet you never acknowledge how many individuals are ruined along the way, taken in by that falsehood." The silence in the restaurant was palpable, almost suffocating. Some patrons appeared uneasy, as if bearing witness to an intensely private confession. "So I decided that if Michael Jordan could shatter a life through hollow pledges," Victoria smiled icily, "I could return the favor. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth." A shiver ran down Deshaun's spine. The woman wasn't merely desperate, she was utterly consumed by vengeance. "You promised everything bearing your name would be golden, Michael," Victoria shrieked. "Now you'll discover what it means to lose everything." Victoria Sterling drew a deep breath, as though unburdening herself was a profound release after months of shouldering that grim burden in solitude. Her shoulders eased marginally, and for the first time since entering the restaurant, she appeared genuinely human. Broken, yet human. "I studied you for 8 months," she stated with an unnervingly calm voice, as if describing the weather. 8 months of my life devoted solely to dissecting your very existence." She paused, allowing the gravity of her statement to resonate with all present. "Your morning routines. I discovered you run at 5:30 a.m., always on the same route along the lakefront trail. Your preferred restaurants? Not just this one, but all 17 establishments you consistently patronize in Chicago." A chill ran down Jordan's spine. He had lived the past months completely oblivious to having been observed, studied, hunted. "Your professional patterns," Victoria continued, her voice taking on an almost academic tone. "I discovered you invariably schedule meetings on Tuesday mornings at your North Michigan Avenue office, that you dine with your family on Sundays at your mother's house, that you come to this restaurant every first Thursday of the month without fail. She took a dramatic pause, observing the horror mount on Jordan's face. You always order the same French red wine, a 1982 Bordeaux. You consistently accept culinary suggestions from the chef when dining alone. You always sit at table 15, with your back to the wall, commanding a full view of the dining room. Habits of a man who prioritizes control and security. A deathly silence permeated the restaurant. Every person present comprehended they were bearing witness to the confession of a meticulously orchestrated scheme to dismantle an individual. But it wasn't just casual observation. Victoria smiled a smile that chilled the blood of several onlookers. I hired private investigators. I hacked into their digital calendars. I bribed restaurant staff to divulge their dietary preferences. Deshaun Williams watched with a mixture of fascination and unadulterated horror. He had saved Michael Jordan from a woman who had elevated vengeance to an exact science. I acquired the poison through a black market contact, Victoria continued with the same unsettling calm, as if recounting a mundane business transaction. It took 3 months to find someone willing to supply laboratory-grade purified ricin. Murmurs of horror rippled through the restaurant. Some patrons instinctively rose to their feet, yet no one dared to depart amidst that extraordinary confession. It was like witnessing a slow-motion train wreck, impossible to tear one's gaze away. Ricin is perfect for what I needed, she explained with the dispassionate clinicality of a chemistry professor. It dissolves completely in hot liquids, undetectable by taste, imperceptible by smell, and causes no discoloration. A single teaspoon would suffice to eliminate 5 men of your stature. Jordan felt his stomach churn, not only from what had almost befallen him, but from the realization that Victoria had transmuted into something far more perilous than an embittered investor. She had become an expert in lethal substances. The dose I administered to your soup, Victoria consulted her gold Rolex with the precision of an Olympic timekeeper, would induce the initial symptoms in approximately 25 to 30 minutes. It would commence subtly, mild nausea, perhaps a sensation of discomfort you would attribute to simple indigestion. She paused, savoring each word as if it were a fine vintage. Then would come respiratory distress, gradual at first but escalating. Your lungs would begin to fill with fluid, a dry cough, followed by a bloody one. In an hour and 40 minutes, total systemic organ failure. The restaurant's maitre d' had turned ashen. Several waiters leaned against the walls, visibly nauseous. Deshaun swallowed hard, his throat suddenly parched. He had literally saved Michael Jordan's life by mere minutes. Had he hesitated, had he doubted what he witnessed, had he chosen not to intervene, his hero would, at this very moment, have been doomed. And the most exquisite part of all, Victoria smiled in a way that was utterly inhuman, was that it would appear to be a completely natural death. A 63-year-old man, decades of high-level competitive stress, suffering sudden cardiac complications during a quiet dinner. She chuckled softly, a sound that sent shivers down several people's spines. No one would ever suspect poisoning. It would simply be another tragedy of fate. Michael Jordan dies of heart attack during dinner in Chicago. The headlines were already written in my mind. Jordan felt a genuine wave of nausea imagining how close he had come to death without the slightest awareness of the danger. How many other times in his life had he been in perilous situations unknowingly? I planned every single aspect for 6 entire months, Victoria concluded with an almost nostalgic sigh. Every detail, every conceivable contingency. I studied the escape routes, police schedules, even the probabilities of rain for this specific evening. She paused for a long moment, her eyes sweeping across the hall filled with horrified faces. Except for one single variable I could neither foresee nor control. Victoria slowly turned and looked directly at Deshaun Williams, her blue eyes fixing on the boy's determined brown eyes. A 12-year-old boy living on the streets of Chicago who chose to be a hero at the absolute worst possible moment for my plans. Victoria Sterling seemed almost relieved to finally be able to recount her full story. Months of solitary planning, of harboring deadly secrets, of living a dual life as a reputable investor and a potential assassin, had created a monumental psychological pressure that finally found release. "You all look at me as if I were a monster," she said, dabbing away the ceaseless tears with an Italian silk handkerchief she took from her designer handbag. "But Michael Jordan systematically and calculatingly destroyed my life. Not directly with his own hands, but through the relentless corporate machine he created and fueled." She walked to one of the large windows overlooking the street, gazing directly at the spot where Deshaun had witnessed everything unfold. Her hands, still trembling slightly, rested against the cold glass. "I lost my $3 million home in Lake Forest. 24 rooms, lake view, gardens that took 15 years to mature. Every last asset was leveraged to invest in the Jordan promise." Her voice, now hushed, was laden with a pain that felt almost corporeal. "My Manhattan apartment, a Park Avenue penthouse that had been in my family for 3 generations, liquidated for a mere fraction of its actual worth to cover the liabilities of the defunct franchise." Victoria pressed her forehead against the pain, as if the coolness might quell the feverish rage seething within her. "My office in Chicago's financial district, 40 employees whose livelihoods depended on me, all summarily dismissed when I could no longer afford their salaries because every last cent was tied up in equipment for Air Jordan fitness centers." Jordan finally mustered the courage to speak, his voice a strained rasp. "Victoria, licensing agreements invariably contain explicit legal caveats regarding investment risks. It is simply impossible for anyone, myself included, to guarantee success in enterprises we do not directly oversee." "Impossible?" Victoria spun around with such suddenness that several people instinctively recoiled. Her eyes blazed with a fury that seemed capable of liquefying metal. "Then why did Marcus Webb, your vice president of licensing, personally assure me that investing in Jordan franchises was more secure than gold? Why did Jennifer Martinez, your director of expansion, guarantee me a 300% return within 2 years?" She took heavy strides toward the table, each word a bullet. "Why did your entire team treat me like royalty when I was signing million-dollar checks, yet utterly disregard me when everything collapsed?" The anger in her voice was so palpable it seemed to alter the very temperature of the air around her. "I discovered I was not the sole victim," Victoria continued, her voice gathering momentum with each revelation. "During my months of investigation, I uncovered dozens of other investors who lost fortunes in Jordan-licensed franchises that collapsed spectacularly." She halted squarely before Jordan, her azure eyes drilling into his. "Thomas Richardson from Detroit lost $17 million in a Jordan restaurant franchise that closed within 6 months. Maria Santos from Miami, $15 million evaporated in a Jordan athletic training center that never even opened." Victoria paused for breath, but her intensity did not wane in the slightest. "Sarah Chen from San Francisco, $22 million invested in a chain of Jordan sports equipment stores. It collapsed within 4 months upon her discovering that the products came with manufacturing defects that the company knew about, but concealed from franchisees." Deshaun witnessed this unfolding revelation with dawning comprehension that the situation was infinitely more intricate than he had initially conceived. Victoria was not merely a criminal driven mad by lost funds. She was a woman who had uncovered a pattern of corporate negligence and could not contend with the ensuing financial and emotional devastation. "But do you know the most egregious aspect?" Victoria asked, her voice lowering to a venomous whisper. "Your company continues to peddle the Jordan dream. They continue to collect millions of dollars in licensing fees. They continue to promise that associating with the Jordan brand guarantees success." She laughed, but her laughter was devoid of any mirth. "All the while, people like me, Thomas, Maria, Sarah, and dozens of others, forfeited everything. Our lives, our families, our dignity, all sacrificed at the altar of Jordan corporate greed." Jordan assimilated every word, beginning to grasp that there was an aspect of his enterprise he was genuinely oblivious to. How much of the licensing operation transpired without his direct knowledge? How many promises were made in his name that he had never authorized? "So yes," Victoria concluded, squaring her shoulders with a wounded, yet still formidable dignity, I decided that if I couldn't recover my 43 million, if I couldn't reconstruct the life your corporate machine had annihilated, I would at least ensure that Michael Jordan personally paid for the empire of false promises he allows to proliferate under his name. The ensuing silence was so profound that the only audible sound was the distant ticking of an antique wall clock. And in that silence, police sirens finally became audible, rapidly approaching the restaurant, where a confession of attempted elimination had just been live-streamed to thousands of people via patrons' cell phones. The truth, in all its painful complexity, was finally laid bare for the world to witness. The sirens of the Chicago police began to wail in the distance, shattering the dense silence that had settled over the restaurant. Initially, they were merely distant echoes, but within seconds they became impossible to disregard. Each pulse of the blue and red lights seemed to advance in synchrony with the fate about to be sealed. The maitre d', perspiring under the pressure of a spectacle never before witnessed in the restaurant's 40 years of operation, approached with deliberate steps. His gaze shifted from the entrance door to the table where it had all transpired. His voice came out faint, yet laden with relief. "The police are arriving." It was more a sigh of catharsis than a mere piece of information. For the first time since the inception of that elegant nightmare, he felt empowered to delegate. The responsibility now shifted hands. Victoria Sterling, still standing, looked toward the tall windows. The red and blue lights now pulsed against the panes, reflecting in her tear-filled eyes. The intense fury that had sustained her performance for hours seemed, at last, to yield to exhaustion and resignation. "It doesn't matter," she murmured, her voice choked but serene. "At least I told my truth. At least someone listened. Behind this flawless brand you venerate, there are shattered lives, stories no one wanted to hear." The restaurant door opened with a decisive firmness, not violence. Two uniformed officers entered with grave composure, their hands positioned near their holsters, assessing the environment with professional swiftness. The contrast between his boots on the polished marble and the glistening crystal chandeliers evoked a cinematic tableau, a clash of worlds destined never to intertwine. Michael Jordan rose with an unhurried grace and pointed calmly. "Officers," he stated, "this woman has confessed before dozens of witnesses to attempting to poison me. The evidence is in her bag." Victoria remained motionless. She made no attempt to flee, uttered not a word. Instead, she slowly loosened her grip on the bag she still clutched to her chest, allowing it to slide gently down the adjacent chair. With a surprisingly gentle gesture, she extended her wrists forward as if the moment had been meticulously rehearsed. One of the officers, blond and bearing a neutral countenance, approached and spoke with institutional precision. "Victoria Sterling, you are under arrest for attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law." As the officers' voices droned on, Victoria's gaze drifted to Michael. The hatred, the arrogance, had vanished, replaced by a profound, bitter weariness. "You will never comprehend," she stated, her tone more confessional than accusatory. "Individuals such as yourself. You never grasp the profound meaning of losing everything, of investing faith in promises never truly intended for us." At the far end of the hall, Deshaun Williams observed the scene in silence. His gaze flickered between the glint of the handcuffs and the crestfallen countenance of a woman who, mere hours prior, had exuded an unyielding resolve. There, amidst the restaurant's hushed opulence, the boy previously unnoticed now bore witness to the public downfall of a woman who had once epitomized power, now reduced to a mere shadow of her aspirations. He had indeed saved his hero's life. Yet he had also, with the perceptive eyes of a boy and the profound soul of an adult, observed the human unraveling of someone who had once believed that vengeance could mend the chasm left by a shattered dream. Once Victoria Sterling had been escorted away by the officers, an eerie silence permeated the restaurant. Patrons conversed in hushed tones, collectively processing the extraordinary drama they had just witnessed. Michael Jordan remained seated for a few moments, his gaze fixed intently upon the bowl of soup that had come perilously close to ending his life. The gravity of the events that had transpired began to crystallize in his mind. Slowly, he shifted his attention to Deshaun Williams, who remained standing near the table, disheveled and barefoot, yet imbued with a dignity that entirely transcended his circumstances. Deshaun, Jordan said softly, you saved my life. The boy lowered his gaze, abruptly timid after the entire adrenaline rush of the situation. I just couldn't let anything happen to you, sir, he murmured. You've always been my hero. Jordan stood up and walked over to the boy. The physical disparity between them was striking. The 6 feet 6 inches former athlete towering over the frail 12-year-old. Yet a mutual respect permeated the air, leveling their disparate statures. Do you know what truly astounds me? Jordan asked. It wasn't just the courage to warn me. It was your willingness to jeopardize your own safety for someone you didn't even personally know. Deshaun shrugged his shoulders. You proved that boys like me can amount to something in life. I couldn't allow anyone to deprive the world of that. The unadorned sincerity of the reply resonated profoundly with Jordan. Michael Jordan placed a hand on Deshaun Williams' shoulder, feeling the gauntness of the malnourished boy through his tattered shirt. How old are you? He asked gently. 12, sir. And where is your family? Deshaun hesitated before answering. I don't have a family. I've been living on the streets for 6 months. I ran away from my last foster home because... He paused, unwilling to delve into the specifics of the abuse he had endured. Jordan nodded understandingly. He didn't need detailed explanations. He was sufficiently conversant with the social welfare system to comprehend. Deshaun, he stated with a resolute tone, you saved my life today. Now allow me to transform yours. The boy's eyes welled up with tears that he struggled to conceal. How so, sir? First, you will partake in a proper meal. Jordan gestured to the maitre d'. Then we'll procure clean attire, a hot bath, and a secure place for slumber. Deshaun could scarcely credit what he was hearing. But in the long term, Jordan continued, I shall guarantee that you obtain a high-quality education, stable accommodation, and every opportunity you merit, not as an act of charity, but as an acknowledgement of your exceptional bravery. The entire restaurant overheard the exchange. A few patrons surreptitiously dabbed at tears, profoundly affected by the emotional denouement of the situation. Why would you do that for me? Deshaun inquired, his voice choked with emotion. Jordan smiled, the first genuine smile since the crisis had begun. Because you reawakened within me a truth I had overlooked. That authentic greatness resides not in what we acquire for ourselves, but in what we contribute to others. A week later, Deshaun Williams was unrecognizable. Professionally cut hair, new clothes, and most importantly, an expression of hope he hadn't shown in years. Michael Jordan had fulfilled all his promises. Deshaun was temporarily residing in a supervised apartment while Jordan arranged for a carefully vetted foster family. Furthermore, an educational trust had been established to ensure the boy could attend Chicago's finest schools. How do you feel? Jordan inquired during a lunch at the same restaurant where everything had transpired. Different, Deshaun replied, still adjusting to his new reality. Sometimes I wake up thinking it was all a dream. It wasn't a dream, Jordan assured him, and this is just the beginning. You possess extraordinary potential, Deshaun. Your courage and observational instincts are rare. With proper education, you can become anything you desire. Deshaun smiled shyly. I want to be like you, Mr. Jordan. No, Jordan shook his head. You've already proven yourself better than me. When I was your age, I only thought of myself. You risked everything to save a stranger. That is a kind of greatness that cannot be taught. The boy silently processed his words. What happened to Miss Victoria? He finally asked. Jordan sighed. She was convicted of attempted murder. But I also discovered she was right about some things. My organization genuinely failed several investors. I'm implementing changes to ensure greater transparency and support. It was a valuable lesson in corporate responsibility that Jordan would carry for the rest of his life. 6 months later, Deshaun Williams had fully adapted to his new life. Integrated into a loving foster family, he was excelling academically and participating in the school's basketball team. Michael Jordan regularly accompanied him, not merely as a benefactor, but as a genuine paternal figure. Their relationship had evolved far beyond initial gratitude. During a visit to the United Center, where the Bulls played, Jordan reflected on how a single moment can completely alter the trajectory of multiple lives. You know, Deshaun, he said as they watched the game from the private suite, if you hadn't acted that day, I would be dead now. And if you hadn't believed in me, the boy replied, I would still be on the streets. More than that, Jordan continued, you taught me something fundamental about true leadership. It's not merely about the points you tally or the wealth you accrue. It's about the readiness to act when others are in dire need. Deshaun nodded thoughtfully. I wish to leverage this second chance to aid other children like myself, he stated. Children who remain unseen, unheard. Jordan smiled proudly. That embodies the true spirit of a champion, to harness one's accomplishments to uplift others. As they watched the game, both were acutely aware that their lives had been irrevocably transformed by a singular act of courage within a refined restaurant. Deshaun had not merely preserved Michael Jordan's life, he had, in essence, redeemed his true soul and rediscovered his profound purpose. The narrative of a street urchin who rose to heroism and a billionaire who rediscovered his intrinsic humanity would continue to inspire countless individuals for generations to come. And what course of action would you take were you to bear witness to such a scenario? Please leave your comments below, subscribe to our channel, and activate the notification bell to ensure you don't miss future narratives that are sure to resonate deeply and prompt profound reflection on life itself.